I am actually excited and scared to embrace this new season of Suck because I know that each week I'm going to progress. The answers will become evident. Action reveals answers. As I know, this weekly format, ideally in my mind, is what's going to become the new cornerstone that I build from. This will be the foundation. What's going on? You're listening to another episode of the Side Hustler's Perspective podcast. I'm your host, Coach Scotty.D.Russell, and got a little bit different one for you today, or a little bit of a switch up, and letting you know I'm on a podcast break right now. Why I'm on a podcast break, what's next, what to expect, just because I feel like it was such a hard pause. I feel like there's a need for explanation, but more of an explanation for myself. So I would say today is more of a permission slip. If you're a consistent listener, or maybe you just started tuning in as of late, hopefully you know that I'm currently on a 2-month break. And maybe you're listening to this in the future, that's fine. It'll be cool to listen back on to see where this evolves into. But what was supposed to be a quick little bonus episode to update you on what to expect next, as I started writing this, though, it ended up turning into a journal. Not to explain to you why I'm taking a break, like I need your external validation and permission to do this. It's not about that, but it's more to work out how things got to this point, why I feel like I need a break, while also convincing myself it's okay and necessary to hit pause and reset. It's like self-care for me, therapy. And this was really hard to write, but it's important for me to just air it all out there because I haven't fully given myself a chance to just brain dump everything out like this before. It's just been bits and pieces of things I've been thinking about, noodling on, and just having like a few brief venting conversations with my wife, the podcast team, and my own coach. This little episode, this journal, is for me to look back on a year from now or so. That way I'm in a position where I can appreciate the growth that I've made. I can show how progress can come from taking breaks, giving myself permission to have some space, as well as seeing how taking a big risk and shaking things up worked out for me. Be able to look back, connect the dots, and be like, wow, I'm really glad I struggled with everything that I talk about today, because it would never have turned out to what it is that I'm working on in the future. So I'm setting myself to look back and just be proud of everything I went through, the progress I made with it, and what it turned into, by giving it some space. And today it's also going to give you a front row seat of what it's like being in my head to understand how this just started as a passion project and the possibilities of what this could evolve into, of what I think it could be, and probably what it's going to turn into, what I couldn't even expect. So let's just dive in. How we got here. This podcast originally started back in August 2016 as the Perspective Podcast, for lack of a better name. I didn't understand the whole marketing aspect of things back then, but I just simply wanted to encourage creatives who felt lost and isolated like me, and the abstract name I was rocking back then was Perspective Collective. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. It was solely an extension of the weekly blogging I had been doing since June 2015. Those blog posts simply evolved into show notes and solo episodes with featured covered artwork, and my voice seemed more natural and impactful, or so I was told, compared to my writing. So audio seemed like the next evolution of getting my voice and ideas out into the ether. And 6 months into the podcast, I then added the next terrifying leap by doing interviews. The first one being my homie, Eric F. Friedenson. I basically just wanted an excuse to chat with friends and people I really looked up to in this space, because I was so isolated living in the middle of nowhere, Iowa. And the podcast slowly scaled as I built a team around me. It's nuts to look back on as I write this out. First thing I did was I hired an editor, Anya Brennan, in 2017 to build an episode queue, because keeping up with weekly episodes was just way too hard. I could never get ahead. And then in 2018, the second thing I did was hired someone to help with scheduling, show notes, proofing, and imagery, my good dear friend Paige Garland. In 2019, I brought someone on to tackle the next terrifying step in the podcast, which was adding video. Shout out to Colton Bacher. And later on in 2022 this year, Jared Cunningham jumped aboard to help me out. And then number 4, finally in 2021, I brought someone on to help schedule out all social media posts, and that was Hannah Schick. After doing this weekly for almost 6 years and almost completely delegating, I would say 80-90% of the podcast to the team, I still somehow ended up burning out. I've been tiptoeing the edge of burnout for, gosh, I would say easily the past 2 years. The podcast has just felt like a grind, but I still did it. Yet I just ignored this feeling and I just continued to push through, thinking like better days were always ahead. And it all compiled and got to this point where I needed a break for a couple of reasons. Number one, just boredom. Oh my gosh, it got so boring. The podcast felt like a mundane day job that I just dreaded going to. It wasn't challenging anymore, and it just became repetitive, like I was on autopilot. I started to resent showing up to do it, even though when I was in the middle of conversations with like guests and everything, or when I'm writing and just getting my voice out there, I loved it. I loved that part of it. But the ongoing task of scheduling guests, the communication, writing outlines, the intros, the outros, doing the recordings, reviewing the weekly checklist from the team, etc., just became more of a burden that took time away from what I was wanting to do, even though I didn't know what I wanted to do. I stopped giving it the full energy, attention, and commitment that it deserved, that you deserved. The podcast became more passive as I'd rush to pass it along to the team to handle, schedule, and publish. I got my part done. Here, you can handle the rest. And something had to give. And the second big reason that things got to where they are today is because so much has changed. Things have changed. When I started this in 2016, man, the process was so simple. I could simply leverage the same process I had been using for blogging, and that I'd create this piece of artwork, and then I'd leverage that piece of artwork as the main way to promote the episode to other creatives who liked my artwork. And the reach I used to get on Instagram was incredible back in the days. I converted a lot of listeners back in, I would say, like 2016 through 2018, the first 2 years of the podcast. But then the algorithm changed over the years. And this isn't about like, oh, the algorithm screwed me. It's not like that. Because not only what I was used to working, it wasn't working anymore. I had to switch it up. I had to evolve with the times. But what I used to feel in terms of excitement and drive just wasn't there anymore. And that drive and lack of excitement, it showed in the declining numbers and reach within the podcast. Something that was doubling each year after year, 2018, 2019, 2016, 2017, those years as well. Like the first 4 years, it was doubling each year. And then it wasn't. But it's all on me. It's not an algorithm. And I used to blame the algorithm and everything else. And, it's just oversaturated. Everybody has a podcast now. But no, it was me. I was changing a lot. Both as a human, my own personal development, my own growth, my interest in like finances, and investing and all that stuff started taking shape too. So I can better help my family, my growth as a creative. And this shift that I had, I'll talk a little bit from like, it was a hobbyist to then an artist to a dream of being a freelancer. But then I became a podcaster and a writer and then a coach. Like so much has changed over the years. My identity has continually kept changing, as well as like me changing as a coach over the years as well and going deeper into that lane of coaching full time. And I was falling behind, and often I still feel way behind on how to best create new content that aligned with the new direction I thought I should pursue. And for the last few years, I've been doing all the things I think I should be doing without doing things how I wanted. I'm a critical overthinker. I'm a critical thinker and I'm a critical overthinker. All these different things I want to do. I want to be the artist. I want to be the coach. I want to do the podcast. But they all just felt so separate. How can I do it all under one roof? Still haven't mastered to figure that out, but I realized everything I was doing leading up to this point wasn't the right way. I was doing too much, which I'll get to that in a little bit. But in 2019, I could really notice the shift in things not working. But I started adding that video element with Colton, thinking that was like the next big solution to spark excitement, switch things up in the podcasting world. But the process for adding video was broken, and it took the backseat to my audio-driven process. I didn't care to streamline it all over time. Audio is what always worked. That's what the numbers showed. So why change it? And this ended up being a huge error on my end. This is my fault, as I ended up having to build out two separate processes. Here's the video process and here's the audio process. But the audio process was like the primary focus, and then it was video. When it was asked backwards, it should have been like, okay, let's change everything, blow it all up, let's streamline it, videos first, and let's do everything from the video. Let's extract the audio from the video. Let's build the whole process and the system from the video. But I didn't. I created two separate processes, which just created more overwhelming work for me at the end. Instead of focusing on making this right and streamlining this process, I was instead extremely focused on just leveraging the podcast to speak toward my new identity shift and focus for that season, which was becoming a side hustle coach in 2019. So the third big reason why we're here where I'm at today is because of this identity shift. It's been really hard on me over the last couple of years, and maybe it's not as easily seen on the outside looking in. I try to share it over time, but making the big shift from being known as the Artist Perspective Collective, what I built my side hustle brand and reputation on, what people brought me on their podcast for, what I was brought on stages for was to speak as Perspective Collective. And if it felt like this old identity was dying to make room for the new identity of Coach Scotty.D.Russell, I really felt like this affected the podcast. Because of the podcast, though, I wouldn't be a coach. If I didn't have the podcast, I wouldn't be coaching today. Because the podcast truly allowed me to find my voice, find my style, find my people, and made me realize the majority of people listening were like me. They were building a creative side hustle outside their day jobs, their families, etc., looking to take the next step within their creative pursuits, or really focus on habits, discipline, mindset, personal development, getting out of their own way. People like you are looking for the tools and motivation to make things happen on your own terms. And I really got a chance to connect with you through that and grow my coaching career from it. And once I understood this is who was listening, I went deeper from a marketing perspective into this side hustle driven approach. Because this is what people were asking the most questions on, what I felt most qualified to speak toward. Because of this, the opportunity to pursue coaching naturally just presented myself. Hey, people are asking me every day on the podcast, how do you make time to grind? How do you get out of your own way? How do you overcome imposter syndrome, comparison traps? So I would create content and episodes and artwork around it, which would then lead to people hitting me up all the time. Hey, can I jump on a Skype call? I want to go deeper with you on this topic you had on this episode. I have a couple questions I can ask you. Can I pick your brain for a little bit? I'm like, okay, yeah, I'll jump on a call. I was coaching before I even knew I was coaching. And so I started exploring the realms of what coaching could look like, as this was making the most direct, visible impact with someone one-on-one. And the more I kept diving into this scene of like, wow, really working with someone directly, the podcast became an afterthought. That's where it started taking the back seat. I would say I easily spent the past 2-ish years, definitely 2021 and 2022, trying to establish and implement and find my new voice, style, approach, and content strategy within my limited bandwidth of being a full-time coach who doesn't have time to draw these days, but also was a dad and a husband who has the pressure to perform and pay the bills to feed my family and keep the mortgage and everything, because I don't have the safety net of a day job. It just became a lot. And I didn't have the time to draw, and I didn't like freelance. So drawing just felt selfish. Instead, I had to find this new voice and create content around this coaching path, even though everybody was following me for my artwork in the beginning. So it's been really, really, really hard. And I've been playing this losing game of finding the new thing that clicked from a social media perspective while also catering to the coaching demand to pay my bills. It's like, damn, I want to create art, but I got to do this coaching, and I want to build up the podcast, but coaching's paid the bills. Another big reason why the podcast focus took the backseat, I wasn't focusing on the podcast to ever be this big money-making machine. It was strictly in the beginning for me to find my voice and just to connect with people who were lost like me. It wasn't like I have to have sponsors. I rarely sought out sponsors. I think I pitched Procreate back in the day, right when Procreate in 2017, 2018 was really on the way up. I pitched Procreate. That's the only person I've ever reached out to for a podcast sponsorship. Clearly that never worked. They were like, we don't do that. And I was like, okay. And I haven't pitched anybody else ever. It's just been people coming to me. And it had to be a good fit, but still, maybe the focus to not monetize the podcast pressured me to devote all my focus into the coaching so I could pay the bills. It's just funny, all these separate identities I've been dealing with is my past love for drawing became a separate identity from coaching. The coaching identity became then separated from the podcast, even though the podcast is what spawned me into coaching. In the coaching identity, in the podcast, especially on Instagram, I'm like, okay, here's Perspective Collective, Coach Scotty.D.Russell, and then here's the podcast identity. Can I overlap them? Is that too much for people? Is that dumb, double dipping? I started overthinking that too. So all things podcast just went to the podcast, even though I wanted to talk about the podcast on my main account. And then I really tried to bring it all together when I rebranded the podcast August 2021. I was trying so hard when I changed this to the Side Hustler's Perspective to align the same marketing, the same message and the soul of the show with my intent and focus on coaching side hustlers through my day job. I was trying to bring it all together, but I feel like I was getting too close to burning myself out towards the end of this, and I was having heavy burnout during this time as well. And also, the other things that became separated is like my coaching community became separated from my podcast community, the Patreon community, and the Facebook communities. Like, everything was just all so separated. Nothing was aligned in my world. From the outside looking in, maybe it looked like I had my shit together, but I've had so many different split focus where my energy and time was being poured into all these different directions, and I just couldn't keep up with it now. Like, nothing was aligned, and it finally caught up to me. And another reason why I hit burnout, and I'm to this point because point number 4 is overwhelm. Got to the point of overwhelm. All these years later, I got to this overwhelm. And because of this split focus, lack of clarity, and limited bandwidth, it caused this overwhelm because no matter what I was doing, this was the core of this. No matter what I was doing, I was letting someone down because my attention was spread way too thin all over the place. And the fact that I kept letting people down or felt like I was letting people down just was like burning me out even more. It led to the heavy burnout that I went through this past August through October in 2021, with the weight of everything just like compiling on top of each other over the years. And it all caught up with me. I felt like I was Superman. I could do it all. I worked great under pressure, but it caught up to me. It really did. What used to be my superpower in making time to always respond to everyone. I always responded to emails. I always responded to DMs. I was back to everybody in Messenger and to text, whatever, has quickly shifted and become one of my weaknesses. Not to mention, posting on Instagram was like a breeze for me. I could post 5 times a week. I was good at this, let alone responding to every DM. But now posting on Instagram just feels like a chore these days. It's just one more thing I got to do. On top of all the stuff that's already working for me, Instagram hasn't been working. And so the thought of like having to be on Instagram and active there, it's just a chore. I mean, it's not serving me during this season. As well as like responding to all the buried DMs in my inbox. Wow, my Instagram DMs are buried. Absolutely buried. I try so hard. But it's just clearly not a priority. I try. It's just, obviously, it's not a priority right now. Which then sounds like, hey, you DMing me, you're not a priority. I'm like, oh my God. Then it starts the cycle again of me letting people down. And not to mention, like, my personal Instagram has become a chore, but like me trying to keep up with a whole other podcast identity on Instagram, the Side Hustle Perspective podcast, me trying to keep up with that is damn near impossible. So trying to balance 2 podcast accounts, wow, it just became too much. Became a distraction, and I have to like take a moment to say sorry. Number one, I have to say sorry to anybody who's listened to the show and then you tagged me or tagged the podcast over on your Instagram account and I never responded over the past 3 to 6 months. I'm sorry. I hope you don't take it personally, as I just haven't been my mentally, physically best and present self over there. It's not you, it's me. It's not you, it's me. It truly is me. Second, I have to say sorry to my guests that have been on the podcast over the last 3 to 6 months. My promotion game has just been horrible, as I've been just skating by doing the bare minimum versus going all out and getting your name, your story, and your message out there. It's because of my identity crisis and feeling burnt out. It's not you, it's me. I feel like an asshole. But I will say I have selfishly enjoyed every conversation that I had with each and every one in my guests, and I gave you my all in that very moment. Within every one of those interviews and conversations, I gave it my all. I showed up every day. I planned. I worked around people's schedules, and I gave you everything I had in those conversations. I was just more slacking in the promotional end of things. Also, sorry, number 3, I got to say sorry to my podcast team. Anya is editing this, Paige is reading this, editing. I feel like I've just grown distant, forgetful, missing deadlines here within like the past month or 2 because I'm like checking out already way early. Missing these deadlines that I was so dialed in. It'd be like a Friday or Saturday morning. It's like Paige would hit me up like, hey, Scotty, where's this? I'm like, oh my God, how did I forget? I would have never forgot that. I was always early, building queue of things. I was getting ahead. But it's hard to be excited about work when I'm not excited about it, which then trickles over to the team. Why would they be excited about showing up if I'm not excited? And I'm showing it's okay to miss deadlines. Like, yeah, clearly something has to give. That's not how I operate. And then finally, I got to say thank you to anybody who's pledged or backed me over on Patreon the last couple years. I tried so hard at times to make it a valuable experience, but I was never fully committed due to other big priorities, such as coaching, which was really paying the bills, putting food on the table, which I felt needed my top priority, my top commitment, my top energy. So Patreon over the years, I'm sorry. Felt like I completely ghosted bringing value to patrons, and my Patreon account just ended up turning more into a tip jar versus a community I serve. So yeah, I feel pretty shitty about that too. I'm really, really, really sorry. So here was the tipping point, why I needed a break. Since starting the weekly podcast, I've never officially had a break. I've never had a break. Not even when both of my kiddos were born. I would still like work ahead and set up like best hits and series. I always found a way to insert a best hits. Even after like every 7th week, I inserted a best hits because I thought to me that was taking a break when really it wasn't. But if I took a break, again, it circled back around to this. I felt like I was letting people down if I didn't show up. The idea for taking a break, like an actual extended break, more than just like a week or two, happened around October 2021. This was the time when I was like turning a corner. I was pulling myself out of that brutal summer, fall, creative slump, burnout, depressed funk. And I was like starting to connect with my art again, realizing like art was the thing that was missing all this time, the element of play within my work. Even though I was tapping into play, the podcast was still weighing me down. But I was just so scared to hit pause because I'd be letting someone down. I was known for this. But that tipping point was, for me, seeing how much I was spending on the podcast each month. Whew. You should have seen my wife's face when I told her this next thing. After doing my Q4 taxes, I got all the total breakdowns for the entire year, not only just for Q4. I was like, how much did I spend this last year on investing in the podcast? And wow, I had spent over $10,000 in 2021 in order to cover a 4-person podcast team, to cover equipment, to cover software like Adobe Creative Cloud, Adobe Audition, to cover my Squarespace website show note hosting, as well as my podcast hosting on Simplecast. Just wow, so much. I was investing way too much time and energy, yet wasn't feeling happy. As well as time, energy, and money, and wasn't feeling happy. Not to mention the growth was stagnant. Like, what am I doing? What am I doing? Investing all this time, money, and energy and not seeing results. But at the same time, it's all on me. I've been so preoccupied with everything else that I failed to, one, even redefine what success for the show looked like. I failed to set new targets to chase to keep me hungry with the podcast. And finally, I failed to focus on restructuring everything and streamlining the process to make my life easier. It's clear. A break was necessary. A break was desperately needed. I need to hit reset and blow everything up. And the idea was like, what happens if I take a minimum of 2 months off to start fresh? Because my spring is crazy. Spring's crazy anyway with 2 conferences, coaching program, maybe a break from the podcast and exploring what the next phase could look like. Maybe this is the right time. And, I'm making it the right time. And this was like December now that I'm deciding these things, December 2021. But the kicker is like, damn, I wish I could hit a pause now and go into the 2022 with a break of 2 months, but I couldn't. I had already scheduled out guests all the way through February, episode 250. So I still had to show up. I was committed. I wasn't going to be like, hey, I got you scheduled in. It's like October and November, and I got your episode in February coming out. We're already recorded. Now I'm not going to like publish it. No, I'm not going to do that. So that means March and April would have to do, which would give me the runway to build a queue of episodes, get ahead, and loosely planned what's next. And this is what's next. So how the podcast progressed over the years didn't align with what I was best at and excited most about. Over the past 2 years, I found through doing all these different coaching sessions, my Instagram lives, doing the webinars that I've done in the past, that I was at my best teaching and coaching in a live, direct, personalized format. During these moments, live and in the moment with you, I was the most challenged, excited, and the most fulfilled version of myself. And I've been noodling on this for a super, super hot minute now. But why couldn't I carry this format of live coaching over to the podcast somehow? Why couldn't I do weekly teachings on a topic and then open it up for live Q&A and coaching at the end? While eventually turning my past interview formats into more like my current coaching program formats with guest expert calls. Why not? What would it look like if my coaching, my podcasting, and communities all aligned in one place? Like a single source I can pour all my efforts, energy, and attention into versus being so split, focused, and distracted? What if I had just one thing to promote year-round instead of separate offerings like boot camps, 12-week programs, podcast episodes, other offerings, whatever? What if I just had one thing? What if I had one thing that took up 50 to 60% of my total bandwidth as a full-time coach, and then that freed me up for the other, what would that be, 40 to 50% of my side hustle pursuits of coaching and creating work within the crypto NFT Web3 world space? Like that's where I really am going to be directing my attention to in the next couple years. So if I could just have one focus over here that served everything, with it freed me up to like build this side stuff as well, where I know things are going, and then gradually build a bridge for people to come over to this space. Like, how can I make that happen? This dream scenario format doesn't exist yet. Now I have my targets on something. Now I know what I want. Now I know what this could lead to. And I understand and embrace that this dream structure and format will come in phases, which means I'll have to blow up my current models of what's working now, which is really scary, which means I probably should pursue this. And it's scary because I do have a good thing going in the meantime, coaching-wise. Until that day comes, I'll just ride this system out. But like the rest of this year in 2022 is mapped out with quarterly boot camps, which feed people into the spring and fall 12-week coaching programs. Get a little taste of coaching here. You want to go deeper? Here we go. I can't blow up these commitments during the season. I can't yet. But what I can do, and what I want to encourage you to do, you have this grandiose idea of what you want to work towards. Start small and then scale your way toward it. So this is how I can start small and scale my way toward that dream model with this phase 1 plan of attack. 1, during this break, I'm going to start testing out live streaming podcast formats over on my YouTube channel during March and April. In fact, when this episode comes out, I'm doing my first live test session today at 12 p.m. Central Time over on my YouTube, link in show notes. I know that's not an evergreen comment to make, but I don't care. The second thing I can do in this phase 1 plan of attack is convert all my current spread out communities into one single Discord. Discord is where most of my alumni students communicate anyway, and where I spend a lot of my time in the Web3 crypto NFT space talking to people. So it just makes sense that this is where I should have my one hub for all communication being for people. And I'm in the process, I actually just put a poll out of getting people to vote on what the name should be. So maybe it's Side Hustlers Collective, maybe it's Creative Hustlers Collective, maybe it's something else by the time you see this. But just know a link to join is going to be in the show notes if you would like to be a part of this. I'm changing everything from my Facebook, The Perspective Collective, that's coming over to Discord. So now you know, it's in the show notes. And the final thing I can do, the third thing I can do during this phase 1 season plan of attack is just slowly build out a new system and processes for show notes, imagery, episode release dates, etc. The frequency of things. How is this going to work out? I have no idea at the moment as of recording this. I have no idea. And I know things are going to be rough, stressful, and challenging early on. But when I started off this podcast, I had no idea what I was doing. And it slowly evolved over time. I figured it out along the way. Just like you figure out along the way. It doesn't have to be perfect in the beginning. This will not be perfect. I am actually excited and scared to embrace this new season of suck, because I know that each week I'm going to progress. The answers will become evident. Action reveals answers. As I know, this weekly format, ideally in my mind, is what's going to become the new cornerstone that I build from. This will be the foundation, especially when I foresee phase 2 and phase 3 is where I'm able to bake in like an ongoing private coaching community where the coaching, the community, and the podcast is all in one. One offer, one thing to just blow your mind that you can get all year round if you want. I'm not worried about alumni then. I just got all year round coaching. I got it when you need it. I'm here for you. And it'll be a premium offering and it's going to blow you away, but it's not ready yet. And I will get there. But the time being, this phase 1, the goal is just to start back up the podcast in this new live stream format, ideally by May. Ideally by May. I'm giving myself 2 months, but honestly, I have zero issues right now. I'm telling myself, holding myself accountable by sharing it. I have zero issues pushing this back into the summer if I need to. I'm giving myself permission right now vocally. Like, this episode isn't for you. I'll be honest. This is for me to figure out this whole new process without feeling rushed or pressured to have it perfect and please people. It's got to be fun, exciting, and challenging to keep me driven to do it, as I want to create this incredible experience that allows me to connect with you more and let you be part of the podcast, not an outsider listening in. I want you in the trenches with me while I do this weekly and we connect and we grow together. That's what excites me. I don't have that right now. I want that. So as we land the plane here, it's funny. Recently, Emily, wifey, just asked me, I want to say it was like last week. Again, not an evergreen comment, but she asked me, could you ever imagine yourself not doing the podcast ever again? Honestly, I thought about it for a second, as the extra time and energy to pour that focus into other things like my artwork and not worrying about showing up weekly to do this. It's tempting. It's super tempting. Like what, all that time I could get back, imagine what I could do. But she already knew my answer. Clearly, I told her no. Like, the podcast is something I'm supposed to do. I feel called to do this, and it'd just be too weird not doing this. But how can I be more intentional about all of it? Where I can respect my time and free up my time for other things like the drawing pursuits I want to do. And Emily agreed, of course. She's a G. My old lady is a fucking G. Truly, she is. And she's glad that I'm taking a break. She's so stoked for me and hella supportive about me pushing pause, as well as she's stoked for me on where she sees this trending. As I've communicated this with her, she's the one I communicate the most with. She's the one that knows I struggle the most with certain things. Like, she knows me more than I know me at times. But with that being said, if you're excited about this new pivot, I want to officially invite you to join me during March and April, every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Central Time over on my YouTube channel. The link is going to be in my show notes. And if you're hearing this later on, ideally, this is the same time, same date I want my weekly format to be, whether it's like the YouTube live sessions that I'll broadcast or eventually within the private community where you get like direct access and get to be on like the coaching format part of it, where I vision this going. So planted the seed now. My goal is every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Central Time. So if you've been a fan of my Instagram live formats, just expect to be that on steroids as I navigate and improve each week, baking in PowerPoint presentations, open it up for coaching at the end. It's going to be dope. It's what I'm at my best and what I enjoy doing the most. And it would just be an honor and super duper cool to have you in on the early new process of me figuring this out so you can give me feedback leading up to the official comeback of the podcast this year. And I just want to truly say from the bottom of my pizza-loving, cat dad, crypto-loving heart, thanks so much for vibing with me all these years. Like, your support truly means everything to me. Stay tuned in the meantime, and as always, keep showing up, keep putting in the work, and keep creating. You got this.